in life, so many times people are telling us just what you said. Don't do that. Be more safe. Choose a safer route, more grown up, whatever it is. So, at this time when people are telling you no, don't do that, how did you ignore that and just say, I'm going to do it anyways?
For me, I always in the back of my mind, I knew it wouldn't matter at some point. I just decided if I don't do something, anything to move me forward, I will always be here. Welcome to MAMWAA. I'm Gordy Camp, your host, and this is the podcast that includes you into my most famous song lyrics.
He's a middle-aged man with an attitude, and he didn't even have one till he met you.
That's right, I'm the middle-aged man, and my attitude will chatter us through all things that I'm passionate about, from spirituality, the gym and fitness, food, travelling, and music or movies. Quick disclaimer, this list is not exhaustive. So you can get on or you can get off and join us for the episodes that you like the sounds of. Dip in or dip out, as long as you keep dipping. Either way, we've got something to say and we're going in 3, 2, one desire I had was to get out of my hometown as a teenager, and that itself prompted so many follow-on decisions. And in a recent interview with Jen Mcallister on her podcast, Just Figure It Out, I went into a lot of detail on this. So in today's episode, I just wanted to share our chat with you on a very subtle crossover episode because Jen has been really kind and she's allowed me to share this interview on MAMWAA as well. So as always, please let me just say I'm an emotional wreck and I have a good cry at times. I do talk about addiction, growing up in an alcoholic household, and I do get quite vulnerable. So please let me just say thank you so much for supporting me on this show. You allow me to stay confident in my own skin, and that helps me to discuss these issues so openly. It does mean the world to me and other listeners as well. So without further ado, let's head over to Jen from the Just Figure It Out podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Just Figure It Out, a podcast to inspire and encourage our listeners to pursue their goals. This is done by sharing stories and experiences from each guest about how they made definite goals, how they failed and succeeded, but never gave up. In essence, how they just figured it out. My name is Jen Mcallister, the host, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Gordy Camp. That's what he goes by. He's a
Hi.
he's a music producer, podcaster, actor, author, speaker, and so many things. So, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about your journey. I know you've been through a lot of hard things, as many of us have been. But please tell it. Well, first, tell us something that you really wanted, and then we're going to circle back to that.
Okay. So in my life, I used to write these stories when I was a kid. I used to write like dragon stories, and I didn't really think about that until my later years. That I always wanted to write a book, but I never knew how. And something that always played with me was I miss writing stories. I miss writing in some form. And like you mentioned, I'm quite a creative person, so I've done script writing. I've been on tour as an actor. I've written scripts. I've like directed plays and all that kind of thing. But the one thing that is missing in that journey was writing a book, and that's something that I really wanted, but I just didn't know how to do it.
Yes. Well, I love that you remember what you enjoyed as a child because I think as we grow older, we kind of squash those things and we think, well, that was then, that was when I was a child, and now I have to be a grown up. So I love that you recognize that writing was something that you love to do and never really squash that too much. It's always been there. And it's like marinating, like, okay, I
Yeah.
still want to write a book. So I love that. So let's go back in time and let's really talk about the things that you've gone through and struggled that have prepared you to be able to talk and present and write and help others. So yeah, tell us about your life.
Well, I guess I'll start with when I was a kid, since we're talking about me writing. So I grew up in an alcoholic household. I was a broken house. Is that the word? Broken
Yeah.
house?
Yeah.
A broken family.
Broken household. Yeah.
um, and like my mother became an alcoholic through that because of that process. Um, so I think I focus mainly on the things I used to enjoy, which is all the writing, the creative stuff. I used to play with little action figures around the house,
Mhm.
and it's like, for example, just for the listeners, I'd fill the bath with water, and that would be the river that they had to get to, and then they would start their journey maybe in a bedroom, and then they'd have to get across the stairs to get to. So I always had this storytelling kind of thing
Mhm.
going on, and I think that's why I remember those things, because it was a break from the reality
Yeah.
of non I'll call it non-security and as a
Mhm.
child. Um, and I guess something that I think no child's aware of it, but as a child, you don't know that you're from a broken family. You don't know that your parents are alcoholics because you're just making sense of what you've got at that time.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, that has kind of stayed with me. And as I grew up, I went to university and college, and I left home when I was 17 because I just had this niggle in the back of my head that if I want to get somewhere, I have to be away from here. I never liked my hometown because I'm from a small fishing village in the Highlands in Scotland. And the mindset, or the small-mindedness, I'm going to call it. At the time, I'm hoping it's evolved since I was a kid, but I was always aware that people were set in a box of some sort. They had their own mentality of this is how things should be. Nothing goes outside of that. And I don't know why I was aware of that, but I just was, because when I was making decisions, you can't do that because of whatever. I wanted to be a TV presenter. You can't do that. Choose a real job. I
Mhm.
wanted to get a job at the newspaper and write articles. You can't do that. Go and work in the factory. And I think because of those things, like for work experience, I wanted to do something really outrageous, like working at a TV station. Choose something else. We're not even looking at that option. So I always had that in my head, like, why not?
Yeah.
Consi
Well, let's just pause right there. I love this because in life, so many times people are telling us just what you said. Don't do that. Be more safe. Choose a safer route, more grown up, whatever it is. So, at this time when people are telling you no, don't do that, how did you ignore that and just say, "I'm going to do it anyways"?
so for me, I always in the back of my mind, I knew it wouldn't matter at some point. So when you're being, I'm going to call it controlled.
Hmm.
All children are controlled. They don't have their own house, their own money. They have to do what is being asked of them.
Hmm.
And I was always aware of that. And I don't know why, I don't know how. I just knew I have to do what I have to do until I can do my own thing. And I think that's why I left at 17. I was like, I don't need this anymore. I would start college. I had an out. I had a way to go and do my own thing.
Hmm.
And I'd always worked from the age of 13. I started with a paper round, saved all the money, and then I became. I don't know if you've heard silver service. So it's basically it's waiting tables, but you can't serve like fork and spoon serving, and you have to hold everything at a certain height, and
Mm.
you have to
Hmm.
pile the plates up and carry that. It's an art form. So
Uh-huh.
I learned that in our local hotel, and I did that at the age of 13. And I just kept kind of doing all those little bit jobs, and then I
Yeah.
became a glass collector at 16 before I left. So I was always making my own money because I knew I need control in my life, and I
Yes.
just
And how did you, I mean, this is just a separate how did you figure it out story anyways, which is, you mentioned you went to university, but you're like leaving home at 17. How did you get accepted? How did you pay for it? Like, how did you make that work?
well, for me, and this is funny because I read a book in my early 30s, which I'll get to in a bit. But one of the things that I read in my 30s was you have to make a decision. And back then, when I was 17, I just decided if I don't do something, anything to move me forward, I will always be here.
Hmm.
Like the people who live in the town, like the people who haven't left since they were kids, like all these people who can't see outside the box.
Hmm.
And I was so aware of it that I was like, I have to do anything, just something that will break me free. So, and this is quite Strange for a young teenager to do, but I got the local newspaper and I opened it at the ads for rooms to rent, and I found one, and I waited till my mum had gone out, and I phoned, and I was like, "How much is this room? Can I come and see it?" So I went to see it that evening, and then I came home, and I told the woman it was a farmhouse, and it was just this small room with a sink in it, and I told my mum, "I'm moving, I'm leaving tomorrow," and she laughed at me. I don't know if it's because she was drunk or she just didn't believe me. I don't know. Uh, but she laughed at me and she said, "Yeah, yeah, we'll see." So the next day, when it was time to go, I just came down with a case with my clothes in it. I didn't pack anything else. And she said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm moving out today. I told you yesterday." And she said, I didn't. And she just didn't know what to say. And I said, "I want to do this." And she said, "Okay." She said, "Will you come back at weekends?" I said, "I might need to because I need to wash my clothes." Um, so I was 45 miles away from home, which is far enough to get to university. But I did go home at the weekends and spend a couple of days with my mum. And I kept a job at the weekends to pay for my accommodation in the factory that I was working at the time. Um, so I would work from 6 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and then 2 days a week I would get the bus back for a 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift, so that I was literally working full-time hours, more or
Mm,
less, so that I could live somewhere else.
mm.
And then a couple of months later I found a job in the city, which was Aberdeen, and I could leave all that behind, and I'd have made the break. But it was just that one thing that I had to do to get me out the box.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that, and I love the mentality, like, and I'm gonna mess up the saying, but the thought that if you keep doing the same thing, you're gonna keep getting the same results. And so the only way to break out of that box to get different results is to start doing something different. And so I love that you recognize that early on, that's the only way. You got to start doing
yeah,
something different. I love that.
yeah.
So you're at university, you start living your life. Talk to us about, how you fell into bad habits and then how you overcame them.
So this is actually the perfect timing for this because I I became an alcoholic myself when I was at university, and I think it was just I wasn't I didn't think I was damaged in any way, but I had these behavioral habits that I'd been raised into, I think, which is this is the way we do things in Scotland. Like you go to the pub after work, you go to the pub at the weekends, you don't do anything else, you just work in pub, work in pub, work in pub. Um, and I started doing that. But then when I mean, fast forward a couple of years, when I was 19, I got up one morning and I picked up a can of beer and I opened it and I downed it. And I thought, what am I doing? It's just really strange, like moment of clarity that why have I just done that? And I was a smoker, so I was quite a heavy smoker anyway. But anyway, I went to classes that day, and I was sat in a lecture, and I couldn't focus. I just kept thinking, what did I do this morning? Why did I do it? I couldn't comprehend the reasoning behind why I'd opened that can of beer
Mhm.
at like 8 a.m. or 7 a.m., whatever it was. So that night, I didn't go to the pub. And my housemates, so my flatmates said, "Are you coming to the pub?" And I was like, "No, no, no. I'm just gonna go home. I've got coursework to do or something." I made an excuse. I probably did have coursework
Yeah.
to do, but I just made an excuse. Um, and they were like, "Oh, come on, come on!" And I was like, "No, seriously, I'm just going to go back to the house." So I went home and I didn't drink for about 6 months because of that one thing that I did that morning, and I hadn't even realized that I was an alcoholic until I made that realization.
Mhm.
Um, and again, I've always been quite strong-minded, so I think I'm somebody, and I think for the duration of this conversation, you'll realize that when I make a decision, it's done.
Mhm.
Like I can just, it's not easy. I say it like it's easy, but it's not.
Mhm.
But I'm so mentally strong that when I know something isn't working for me, it may take a few years to get to its worst, but when I realize, I can usually flip it.
Mhm.
Usually. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, just the being clear, you can call it different things, strong-minded, or you had an epiphany or a realization, but I
Mhm.
think it's so important with anything that we want or that we don't want, that it's clear, and then it sets us up to just figure it out.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you're sober for 6 months, and then talk about briefly talk about the rest of your adulthood, because I know it doesn't end there.
Yeah, so, I mean, I stopped drinking for 6 months, and then I busied myself with everything, so I threw myself into college work, uni work. I took extra shifts. I was a waiter in a restaurant by then, and I just refused to go to clubs after work. I'd go straight home, and eventually people stop asking. People
Hmm.
stop asking you to go places because you always say no. Um, and then I'd just see everyone when they got home or when we were hanging out in uni. So I graduated, and then I moved. I made a decision to move into England, um, which I did after a couple of years, and then I got into the world of work and made new friends. They always went to the pub. I always went to the pub. Um, I started drinking all the time, and then something that happened is another turning point for me. I got really drunk after work. I just got a new job. I ended up unemployed for about 7 months. Um, which was a really down point. I mean, this is where drug addiction comes into play because I got so depressed that I couldn't find a job. Um, that I started smoking a lot of marijuana. As a smoker, it was just like a relaxant for me,
Hmm.
but it genuinely wasn't. It was an escape from the depression. So long story short, I got the job, um, and on my first night of my new job, a couple of people that worked there said, "Oh, do you fancy coming to the pub after work?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I got really drunk, and one of the guys lived in a big house in a really affluent area of these parents, and they had a swimming pool. So I went back to his house for a few extra beers. Everyone went home, and he had a balcony above the swimming pool, and I jumped off it drunk. I didn't bend my knees, and I snapped both my feet in the center at the same time. Because I was drunk, I didn't know, so I stumbled out the pool and all that stuff, and the next morning, I couldn't walk, um, and then I ended up not being able to work again.
Mm.
So, that was another realization that I'm an idiot. Why would I put my life at risk? The key thing here, I think, to mention is something the doctor said to me. I don't know, have you ever dropped a glass and it slipped out your hand, and when it hits the floor, it shatters into 1,000 pieces?
Haven't done that, but I've seen that.
So the doctor said if I'd been going any faster into the water, my skeleton would have shattered like a glass when
Ooh.
you drop it. Um, so immediately, I stopped smoking marijuana. I stopped drinking again. I couldn't walk for 5 months, so I was homebound, and I was quite stubborn. My sister tried to take me out in a wheelchair, and I refused because I was embarrassed. Um, but I used that moment to take stock, and I realized that TV presenter was still on my list from school, and I was told you cannot do that. So I started doing lots of research. I read lots of books on how to become a TV presenter, how to improve your skills, presenting skills. Um, I had nothing else to do, so I may as well. And in that time, one of the key things was a big percentage or a majority of TV presenters are actors first.
Mm.
So I became an actor. And whilst I couldn't walk, I started applying for um, auditions in drama schools, and you have to pay for each audition. So I took an overdraft from the bank, and I put faith. I'm not telling anyone to get into debt, but I put faith in this is it for me. Another turned decision. Um, and I didn't spend any of that money on anything except auditions. So I wrote lots of checks. It was checks back then. Nothing was contactless. There was no bank transfers. So I just wrote lots of checks, sent them all off for the application forms. Every penny gone. Um, and because you're paying for auditions, you have to get an audition. They can't
Mhm.
refuse it.
Mm.
So by the time my feet healed 5 months later, I'd had all my dates through for auditions. So I went to London, um, which is about 2 hours away from where I was living. And I did some one-to-one sessions with a practitioner who could teach me how to act before my audition,
Mhm.
having never acted in my life. Um, but again, I just had to put faith in the process. And I think I must have done about 15 auditions for the top drama schools. I didn't apply anywhere except the ones that would almost guarantee you'd get jobs when you got out,
Mhm.
unless I was going to be really bad, which was likely. Um, and the very last audition that I had, I don't know why the director said this, but he asked me one question. He said, "What happens if you don't get in?" And I don't know why, but because of everything I'd been through, I just didn't care anymore.
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, if you don't let me in now, I'll be back next year and you'll let me in then. And if you don't let me in then, I'll come back again and again and again. So save yourself the time, save yourself the bother, and just let me in." And he laughed, but that's the one I got.
Mhm.
I think I probably did a really bad audition, but he must have seen something where I just let go of all inhibitions and he just said, "He needs this now." I don't that's my assumption, but I had nothing to lose. I
Yeah.
had nothing to lose, so I just said what I thought, and that was that.
Yeah, I love that because it shows character and, there are those that just wanna be the best and do the best all the time, and then there are those that want to learn from failure and keep trying and keep persevering, and so, yeah, that's such a great character trait that you were able to demonstrate to him, and I'm sure that's why he chose you is because you had grit and you weren't gonna give up.
Yeah, and I don't know where that came from, if I'm honest. I don't know
Mm,
where that trait of what have you got to lose?
mhm.
What's the worst that can I don't know where that came from in my life.
Mhm,
I think it's because I was so desperate to get away from the starting point that I didn't have anything to lose, and I
mhm.
think it was just always there. Yeah, that's something that baffles me myself, every time something changes in my life, but
Yes. So, I know we're not even digging as deep and hearing all the different stories that have, brought you to where you are now, and I feel badly about that because I
no, it's
sense
okay.
there's so much more. So, um, what is your why? Why are you doing what you do right now?
Happiness and joy, and I think I mean, something I didn't go into was before I started sorry, just after I started drama school, my mum died,
Mm,
and it caught me so off guard, um, and that kept me going in that process because before she went, she came to see me in an amateur production just before I started drama school, and again, she was really drunk, but in her pride, she ran it's a national theatre, so she ran through all the stalls, got to the front of the stage, and she put her arms on the front of the stage, and she just looked dead at me in the eye, and she screamed, "My boy, that's my boy." Excuse me. And that made me realize that when something starts to happen, don't let it go. And I guess that was my message that you've made the right steps now. You've got to your start point. That wasn't your start point. This is your start point.
mhm,
Um, and if I was to stop at any point, I mean, years later, I became a heavy smoker, and I had to go through smoking addiction again. I've managed to stop for years, started again. I went into alcoholism again because my mum had passed and I hadn't grieved properly. But throughout all of it, I didn't stop what I was working on, so I kept working.
Yes.
And because I did the blueprint, I'd done the groundwork, all I had to remind myself of was, "This will get me to where I want to be. Just keep plodding away, and it will
Yes.
happen." Yeah.
Well, one thing I love that you had such I'll call it a gift that your mother was there, that she could express how proud she was of you, and especially because, as you mentioned, that she passed away not too long after. What a gift to
Yeah.
be able to have that from your mother. Now you're talking you've been talking about, being addicted, coming out of it, going back into it. One thing I want to say, I admire that in a kind of a weird way, which is, we're in life, we're going to make mistakes over and over again. And at no point should we ever say, well, I can't. I keep making that same mistake and give up. Like that shouldn't be an option.
Mhm.
And so, give yourself grace and know that you can keep picking yourself up over and over again. I mean, of course, the best case scenario is to get over it, right? And not go back to the addictions or the bad habits or whatever, but it's a reality. It happens and it's okay. Just pick yourself back up and
Mhm.
start over again and again. And you're a great example of that. Now, having said that, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you're now teaching other people? Like, I'm just going to guess, and then you let me know, like the reasons you get into addiction. Do you help people become aware of that so they don't fall back into those habits? Or, talk to us about how you help other people through different things, speaking and writing and all of the things.
So, a majority of my presenting work and motivational speaking is around something you've just mentioned, the resilience, the
Mhm.
bouncing back. I Me personally, this isn't something that we talk about in sessions, but I'm very awestruck by individuals who've never, and I'm using air quotes for anyone who's not watching the video, struggled with addiction. Everyone has their own struggles, but with addiction, a, a lot of that is internalized. It's not always it's not always because of something that happened to us, but how we feel about ourselves because of something else.
Mhm.
Um, so when I'm presenting or when we're doing motivational talks, it's about the resilience. Like you said, we'll always make mistakes. There will always be something with a hook pulling us backwards. But how do we lessen the rein on that hook? How do we make it a little bit looser every now and again when
Mhm.
we've constantly got something tugging at us? Um, and it's different for everyone. Everyone has a tool that they can utilize themselves. So for me, I meditate and I love my spiritual side, which I've had from my early 20s, and I've had to work through a lot using that as a tool.
Mhm.
But again, struggles still crop up; they never go away. Um, and if it's an external struggle, then something I always say when it comes to resilience is we cannot control what people do, but we can always control how we react to it.
One of my favorites.
And something that I mean, like I've walked away. I've done a 180 from a lot of people who I've loved so dearly because I had to for me,
Mhm.
and they've understood. They get it, but our lives can't move forward if we are attached to someone who's pulling us as a hook or as a rein back. And it's just these are hard decisions that we have to make. And again, it's about those decisions.
Mhm.
When are we aware of who or what is pulling us back? And if we're not, we need to go and find them. And once we find out what they are, we need to strategize what we have to do about it. And
Mhm.
it's physical. We're in a physical plane here. We're not living in a story, but we can make a story out of it. We can do something differently to, like you said, to get a different result.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's so true what you say. It's hard to separate ourselves from people that we've been around for so long. And because we feel maybe guilty, like we're not being kind, or we may appear better than you, but really it is about us, and it's not selfish, because when we can take care of ourselves, then we were able to take care of many other people and be a positive influence for other people. So
Yeah.
it's not selfish to separate yourself from people, situations, or whatever it is, like you said, that pull you back into those habits that you don't want to have. And you could even say, and take it even further, find those new people that will help you even become a better person than you currently are right now. So, yeah, your situation, those that you surround yourself with, are so important.
Yeah. I can't remember where I heard it, but there's a phrase that you become who you surround yourself with.
Yes.
You are,
Maybe,
you're the lowest version of the best 5 people that you start to be around, and
yes.
eventually you become the top.
Yep.
Then you change your circle again. Yeah.
In the last couple of minutes that we have, please tell the listeners different ways that they can listen to you, purchase your book, support you, follow you, all the things. What is the best way that our listeners can connect with you?
Yeah, of course. So I've got a website, www.gordycamp.com. Gordy Camp is my brand name, which is obviously short for Gordon, Gordy Camp, Campbell. Um, so if you type Gordy Camp into Google, you will see almost everything that I've ever done. Instagram at Gordy Camp, Facebook, Gordy Camp TV, Threads at Gordy Camp, and YouTube /Gordy Camp. But because I used my full name for my book, which is, I've just got one here, Walks with
Mm.
Sam, I use my full name for that one, Gordon Campbell, which is available on Amazon. And this book actually came as a result of those addictions, a breakdown I had when I was 30. And I really wanted to just put a lot of information to help people who are going through it, who need to understand that they're not on their own, and also to help people who are trying to support their loved ones or friends or people they know and they've never experienced it themselves. It's a way to say this is real lived experience from myself and many others who I've worked with to put this together. Because I've not had every mental illness, I've only had a couple, but we've all worked together to help other people kind of support each other in a way
Yes.
that we can't when we don't know them. Yeah.
That's very meaningful. And I want to thank you for being vulnerable in your book, but also on the podcast today. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. It's been such a good chat. Thanks
It
for
has.
having
It
me.
has.
I really hope you all enjoyed that chat, folks, and thank you so much to Jen again for inviting me onto the show. I will just take the opportunity to reach out to you listeners and say, please do open up and connect if you need to chat about anything that you might be suffering with in this life. It isn't easy to get through these struggles that we have in the world, and with support from each other, there is always a helping hand or a shoulder to cry on. And secondly, if you ever do feel that things are impossible and you cannot get through the stumbling blocks, we always find a way to figure it out. There are ways to ask for support, and there are free resources on YouTube, online, and with other people around to help you learn what you need to make it happen. So best of luck to you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to make sure you never miss a thing, and leave us a comment to tell us what you are figuring out at the same time. Until next time, guys, look after yourself and others, and we will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.